Welcome to Hey Listen, where we discuss faith, leadership, and the mission of the church. We're so glad you've joined us. Now to today's episode. All right, so we're ready for part 2 of the gospel according to Winnie the Pooh. We've talked a lot about Pooh and who he is and how he came about. Edward the Bear, is that what we said?
Edward Bear.
Edward
There
Bear.
is no definite article there. It's
Okay.
Edward Bear.
Edward Bear. But we ended up with Winnie the Pooh. We had a great conversation of that childlike faith. But there's a lot more characters in Winnie the Pooh. So let's dive into some of what those look like, starting back with Winnie the Pooh.
Yeah, we want to just touch base on the main guy, right?
Sure.
You know, and he is the lovable, honey-eating, where's breakfast and lunch? You know, he's focused on meals. So that, you know, come on, he may be a Baptist. He's so focused on when are we eating? But as we said before, he really is at peace with himself. And we talked a lot about his simplicity in our last episode. That's a good word, but it's that idea of not being dumb. It's being simple, being at peace with yourself. One of the best lines, he says, "I am short, fat, and proud of that." You know, and so you know, I don't know how, if I should have said that or not, but I think it's cute because it just shows that he has no desire to be anything but himself.
Right.
And we have to embrace it. Like there are some things we can control in our lives, but there are some things physically, mentally, we can't. Like we have what we have, and I think some people go around just feeling bitter their whole lives because they don't have a certain look or a certain degree or mind.
Sure.
And Pooh's just like, forget all that.
Yeah. And man, comparison is so hard.
It
I mean, we see it
is.
everywhere. We've talked a lot about technology and stuff, but I mean, comparison is going to just tear you down so quickly.
I think that's the problem with our culture is now we can see examples of the smartest and the prettiest in a way that, you know, even when I was growing up was much more limited.
Yeah.
And so the message of Winnie the Pooh of it's okay. It's okay for you to just be you. And the other characters do not have this strength. Okay. So like Milne did a good job of only having one character, one of the animals anyway. Christopher Robin, we'll talk about him at the end of this conversation. He too comes across as kind of balanced and healthy in some ways that the other characters aren't. But, you know, here you have right in the middle of all this chaos, this wonderful, simple Winnie the Pooh. And all the adventures, all the good times that they have, he always ends up being the hero.
Right.
So that's pretty cool. But yeah,
Yes.
that's Pooh in a nutshell. He's just happy to be himself. And as long as there's a little bit of honey in a jar somewhere, he's a happy bear.
Probably all relate to that just a little bit. So we've talked about Pooh. How about everyone's favorite, Piglet?
Yeah, so Piglet's super cute. In the Disney adaptation, the artist did such a great job with him, and so yeah, he's really cute. He's the little one. He's the little guy in the whole group, and so there are some of the stories where his size, his being very small, ends up being what they need.
Right.
They need a small guy to get a small creature to get something done. But as most of us know, when we feel small in the world, we're ruled by our fears. And we see with Piglet a picture of ourselves when we just feel overwhelmed, when we feel like we're an imposter in the room. When my daughter went to school, a very wise person who was mentoring me through my daughter going to college, but also a mentor of her, a very successful man who had all the big time degrees and things of that nature, very successful fellow. He said to watch out for imposter syndrome. And so if you're a person that was raised like I was in a small town, it doesn't take long for you to feel like Piglet. When you go into that first lecture hall as a student and there's 100 students in there, or even 40 or 50 when you went to a school where 20 people in the room was as much as there ever was, right? So Piglet is such a great character for those of us who, you know, we come from, smaller towns and more humble backgrounds that way. But what we see with Piglet is we see fear constantly pulling him down, and Pooh seems like if there is one character that's Pooh's best friend, it seems to be Piglet, right? And I think the reason why is because Big Old Pooh Bear, he knows down deep inside that all the other characters appreciate him, but Piglet needs him.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so there's wisdom there on Pooh's side, right? There are times in life where our friendships, I think sometimes we view friendships as like, oh, how can it make me better? Or, oh, we have things in common. And Pooh seems to not be thinking that way. He's looking for where he knows the need is greatest. And so he invests in Piglet. And what's funny is that throughout the stories, as his character develops, he becomes quite brave. He starts to be more and more bold in his adventures, and he becomes not just the one cowering behind, but he becomes a person that's actually engaging in the adventures. So we see growth in his character over time, and I think the reason he grows is because he has Pooh.
Yeah.
He has Winnie the Pooh with him and guiding him.
Yeah, absolutely. So how about Owl, the intellectual owl?
Yeah, people, when you start watching Winnie the Pooh, you start trying to figure out who you are.
Right.
And so what I've decided is that I think we're all all these characters are us, depending on the day.
Yes, I agree. I was actually thinking that of I was going to start with the conversation of who are you in Winnie the Pooh, but I think we're all a little bit of each of them.
Exactly. I think the reason I bring that up now is because, Owl is the pseudo-intellectual, which is, my role around here is to be the pseudo-intellectual. He's very formal, and he uses the big words. He sometimes knows what they mean, and sometimes he doesn't. So, Ridgecrest, you never know. I mean, maybe I know what I'm talking about, and maybe I'm not. Every once in a while, I'll use a word, and somebody will say, "That's not a real word," and I'm like, "Really? You think I'm going to say a fake word in front of 1,200 people?" It could happen, but Owl is an intellectual who knows much less than he thinks he knows, and so he represents the academy in a lot of ways, where the knowledge is kind of abstract. He actually never helps much in any of the adventures. Now he has the advantage of wings. So in several of the stories, one of the famous stories of the flood, he's the one that's able to fly around and find out where all the people are. So he's useful in that way because he uses his wings. Problem is when he starts using his mind, he's not super helpful. And it's funny, Rabbit is the only literate one.
Okay.
Owl is not literate. If you look, he's always misreading, misspelling, misunderstanding.
Okay.
So he kind of represents if you think about Milne being a student at Cambridge, he was kind of still in that world where you had the upstairs, downstairs world in English society. He kind of represents that very stodgy Victorian landowner that never had to do anything in life, that sounds really intelligent and has the gravitas. There's a big word that Pooh would never use. He's important and sounds important.
Yes.
And is empty as can be.
Okay.
So Owl sort of represents that part of us where we want to pretend that we know more than we do. And I think that's one of the reasons why Pooh and he don't interact a ton. He is a sort of mentor figure. From time to time, he's able to contribute.
Advice
and there is wisdom there. And what we sense from him is that his wisdom is the wisdom that we truly do learn from age and experience. And so there's a practical sense there, but what he doesn't realize is he's not embracing the practical. He keeps trying to embrace that pseudo-intellectual.
Yeah, just trying to impress a little bit.
And it's empty.
Yeah.
And in church, I think this is one of those things that over the years I've had to really think about myself is, what's my goal here? Is my goal to be a person who shares knowledge and wisdom, or are you just trying to impress with what you know and that kind of thing? And I think that it's important for us to be careful there. That as I get older, I realize that there's a lot of things that I can contribute to a conversation that aren't really helpful. Let's listen to what people are really asking.
Yeah.
And let's answer the questions that are there. The owl just starts talking.
Yeah.
And he is going to answer questions that nobody's asking. So don't be like Owl in that way.
And we even tell parents, we tell parents, answer the question that is asked. Especially with hard topics.
Yes.
Don't take it further. We're talking about developmental stuff and on that side of things. Answer the question that was asked and let them guide the conversation. I think that's wise. So you said Rabbit is the only one who is literate.
Yeah, that's right.
Let's talk about him.
As I understand it, he's the one that can write the signs and put the names above the doors. He still, has his letters backwards and everything every once in a while. It's so cute, how Disney did it. And the original illustrations too, I forget the guy who wrote them, but they're quite classic. They're very, very beautifully done. But Rabbit is clever. He is too clever by half, as they say. He is always thinking. He is appreciated by Winnie the Pooh, but Rabbit is impatient and irritable all the time. He is just, if anybody has negative nervous energy, it's always going to be Rabbit.
Right.
Now we're going to talk about nervous energy with Tigger, right? But that's a positive nervous energy. This is the kind of nervousness that can really bring a team down. This is not the kind of personality that makes for good teams. Even though there is knowledge and cleverness, again, Pooh isn't clever; he's simple. But when there is a need, he's the one that figures it out. And also with Rabbit, we see he's obsessed with rules, planning, order. He wants everybody to kind of get into his way of thinking.
Sure. And that can be dangerous in ministry. We do not want to put all of the rules over people. We, in Next Gen, we talk a lot about people over policy. We have policies there for a reason, but we want to care for people really well.
Yes, yes. I think Rabbit may be a good mascot for, the kind of Baptist world I've been a part of over the years. And, we are sometimes so concerned about how many baptisms we have and how big the churches are, how big the denomination is or isn't, that we're trying to come up with a new clever plan instead of just leaning into the simple gospel roots. Baptists in their origins, we were a simple people. We couldn't go to Oxford or Cambridge. When the first Baptists in the early 17th century, 1604 and following, they couldn't even go to school. In fact, they couldn't even have churches with steeples on them. So when the Baptists first came to America in the early colonial period, first thing they did was they put big steeples on their churches because they wanted to say, "Hey, we're here." And then in America, Baptists started to turn into a big denomination. And we became impatient and irritable. And I think there were times when instead of loving people well, we were just trying to get bigger. And a lot of churches have that Rabbit kind of mentality. I think I can say after, some hard meetings here at Ridgecrest the last 6.5 years, we were a church that was kind of in Rabbit mode. It wasn't that the leadership, that's what they were aiming for or whatever, but we were just frenetic in our pace, and some great things were happening. But there were times where I think maybe now we look back and we say, okay, we missed some things, some important things, because we were moving too fast.
Sure.
And so Rabbit is a pretty good picture of just American society and the speed at which it goes, and also, some mainline denominations like Baptists as well.
Okay. So the next character we're going to talk about is Eeyore, who I think is probably the one people are most compared to. You hear often, well, they're kind of an Eeyore.
Yep. Absolutely. And what's interesting about Eeyore when you read the books is he is smart and he's thoughtful, but he's taken his knowledge to darker places. So I sometimes Eeyore is a little too familiar to me. My dissertation, I wrote on death and dying and funeral preaching, and that I tell people that makes me really fun at parties. So Eeyore can be brooding, but the reality is that from a Christian perspective, those deeper things, where we should land is that Christ defeated all those dark things. So Eeyore never gets out of that darkness. And so, Kayla, you and I both know all we have to do is if we look around long enough any day, we can find something that is sad.
Absolutely.
And if we say, okay, that's how I'm going to define my day and my reality, well, that's what Eeyore is always doing. Not always. There's a couple moments. His birthday party, I'll tell you about that in a minute. There's a really good story from his birthday that's sweet. But, like when people come up and try to help him, he's like sarcastic. He's saying things like, well, yeah, you would help me, but, he always qualifies something. And, it's a bummer. Like when you're around people like that all the time, it can kind of get you down.
Sure.
Right?
Yes.
So yeah, Eeyore, he's not who we aspire to be most of the time, but he does represent growing up in Baptist churches. I heard so many people say like, well, I just don't know what to do about the future. Our kids are just going to be in a terrible world with all these terrible things happening. What's that sound like?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I just challenge you to think about the voices you hear on Sunday, your voice on Sunday.
Yes.
Are you the one that says, well, the music was just too loud?
Right.
Well, the preacher went 2 minutes too long.
Yes.
No comments from Colby on that since he's got my counter up there all the time.
Yeah. As we prayed for Vacation Bible School at the beginning of summer, we kept asking people to pray for 3 things: kingdom impact, eternal impact, deep discipleship, and unifying of the church. And I hope that just carries on because we want everything we do to be unifying of the church. And when we find things to just kind of those little complaints, it just tears apart the church.
So just a funny thing that happened this weekend at church. I've had a little bit of a renaissance in my heart, a refreshment. I've been able to breathe a little bit more. And so I was going around and shaking hands like I do before service, and I never can get up to the upper deck, but I was on the lower level and just shaking as many hands as I could. And I said, well, how are you doing today? And a lot of people said, fine or good. And every person that said that, none of them said it in a way that was dark or nobody was saying it in a bad way. It was just the standard answer that we get. And I just said to him, I said, we can do better than that. We can do better than just fine and good. When we come to God's house, we want to have the attitude that we're going to leave a little better, a little higher. And the problem is if we come in with an Eeyore-like attitude, most of the time we're going to leave with an Eeyore type attitude. And I've said to our worship team many times over the past 6.5 years here, be careful. Like we need to think about the ebb and flow of worship, because if we start high and we always end really, really low in our singing, well, then that puts me in a position where what do I do? Do I stay low?
Sure.
Do we then go high again? And so it's like this. And I think that sometimes when we pray, we just assume that we need to pray about bad things or, pray for the hurting people in the world, which is understandable. Okay. We need that from time to time. But sometimes we just need to praise the Lord.
Absolutely.
And so I think the church, what I'm praying for Ridgecrest is that the spirit of Eeyore will go away.
Yes.
That we will not allow the doldrums to dominate. So the good story about Eeyore, it's his birthday, and Pooh forgets, because that's what Pooh Bears do. And he goes, I've got a honey jar at home. Imagine that. Winnie the Pooh has a honey jar at home. So he goes home. So he's walking back. What happens? He thinks, you know what? It was really a smart thing that on this long journey, I brought some food. And so he starts eating the honey. So he eats all the honey and all he has left is the jar. Well, at the same time, I think it's Piglet, he goes off to get a balloon. And he's so excited he had a balloon from another thing and he was going to bring him this balloon. And he gets so excited that he pops the balloon. And so naturally, what does Eeyore get for his birthday? He gets an empty jar and he gets a bursted balloon. But at the very end of that piece of that story, Eeyore is happy because he has a jar and he has a balloon. Even though it doesn't work to him, it still means something because it was a gift.
Yes.
And he puts the broken balloon into the jar. And that's kind of how the story ends. And you think, okay, here's Eeyore who could have said, well, here we go again. My life is so terrible. And yet in that little moment, He was happy with what he had. So you even see a little bit of that light and the thankfulness, like when Pooh finds his tail and is able to get it attached again. There's a sense in which even Eeyore can't help but appreciate the love that's been shown to him.
Yes. Yes. All right. So let's talk about Kayla, who you pointed out is the only female character in our list of characters.
Yeah, I don't know what that's about. I mean, the Cambridge world of that day would have been very male-centric. There were a few females studying at Cambridge in the early 20th century, but not many. It was a rare thing. And so, I mean, he came from a man's world. And so there's a little bit of that. But Kayla is really a sweet character. Not a main player in the stories much. She's there, but really just as a kind-hearted, patient, docile creature. She is. She just doesn't have any patience for the overthinking owl or the clever rabbit, because those things don't help her little baby. So when they're off chattering and talking and stuff like that, she just kind of ignores them, like any good mom should. Like she just takes care of her baby and loves him and cares for him, and it's really sweet. And it seems like she and Rue kind of comes in, and we'll talk about Rue at the same time. Rue kind of comes into the stories almost like at the end of the original book. He kind of comes in at the end, and he's a little bit of Rue is a little bit of a new thing. And Rabbit in particular just doesn't like this at all. Like for whatever reason, Rabbit decides that he doesn't want Rue in the forest, which is kind of sad, right?
Sure.
I mean, it's kind of like rejection.
Right.
So all of a sudden, as you're reading the story, you're like, oh, we're kind of going into a deeper thing here. What's funny about it is that Kayla realizes what's going on because Rabbit gets Pooh to try to distract her so that they can kidnap the baby. So this is dark stuff. Okay, it gets dark. And Piglet, what they decide is Piglet's the only one. I think it's Piglet. Or Rabbit or one of them is small enough that they switch it out. And what's funny is that Kayla knows it the whole time, but plays along. And takes them home and washes them and everything. So there's like a sense of humor there.
Yes.
Like instead of it being an ugly thing, a mom's wisdom here turns it into something of a joke. And so there's a beauty to her character, and there we see. Also, another thing about it, just a small thing, is that Kayla, as I understand it, later on in the stories, sort of adopts Tigger. And Tigger becomes a part of her family. And Tigger is very, very protective of Kayla and Rue, because Tigger's kind of a guy that's bouncing around all the time, but he doesn't have roots. Sure. And so this mom realizes that this really overactive but really sensitive personality needs a home. She opens. So we really have a picture there of gospel grace and hospitality.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we've kind of talked a little bit about Tigger, but what else do we have to say about Tigger, who is probably the one I would most relate to?
There you go. There you go. Yeah, I mean, Tigger is, he's the bull in the china shop, right? Another thing about Tigger, though, is he's overconfident, which you are not. You're not.
This is probably true.
You're not that way. So Tigger, I can do.
I'm just excitable.
Right, you're excited. And so Tigger, though, he takes that excitement to a point where he thinks he can do everything. Like Tiggers are the best at everything. So his nervous energy is sometimes channeled into areas way beyond what he should be doing. And that's what gets him in trouble. So energy is good. Reckless energy is not good.
That and so impulsivity.
That's right. So Tigger is a warning against those who have we in soccer we used to talk about certain players that had an engine that was always running, like they never seem to tire. Well, that's fine if that energy is productive. Tigger represents the kind of energy that can get out of control and do damage, and yet his character develops over time, and he becomes protective of Rue. He becomes sort of, because he can bounce, because he has energy, he becomes a productive part of the friendship there in the 100 Acre Wood. He's able to get some things done because of his energy.
Don't you think that kind of, we can connect that to discipleship and pouring in, Kanga poured in to him and brought him in, but then he's doing that again. And so modeling that, what a beautiful picture of what discipleship and community can look like in that.
And one thing we've not talked about much is the diversity of these characters. It shows that there can be difference and yet community. And we'll talk more about that as we go along. But that's one of the things we see is like these characters, they're not similar in any way. And yet they work pretty good together.
Right.
And Pooh is the connective tissue between all of that.
Yes.
His love and friendship brings it all together.
Yeah. And I know we said at the beginning, at least of episode 1, this was not a Christian story, but how we can see each of these characters, even just in our own church and how we interact with each other. But the body of Christ, all these different pieces, they do come together. We all have a purpose in that.
That's right.
That's right. So I think we've run out of time to talk about Christopher Robin. So we'll have to start episode 3 talking about Christopher Robin.
Sounds good.
Thank you again for joining us today. We'll see you next time on Hey Listen.